Hello, BlazersEdge.com readers, Blazer fans. Welcome to our most recent edition of the Blazers Edge Videocast. I am Sam Tung, contributor to the site, along with the editor of the site, Dave Deckard. Dave, how are you doing here as the Trailblazers were talking just as the team finished up their long four-game road trip? So how are you doing here as the Trailblazers? You know, we're at the midway point of the season, and the Trailblazers have officially surpassed the 30-win mark.
Well, I'm doing pretty well. I'm noticing as I'm looking into the camera here that I forgot to trim my goatee today, which is a bad mistake when you are going on before millions and millions of viewers. So I'm a little rough looking today, but hopefully still okay. And that's about how the Blazers have been the last couple games. They had a really rough night against Houston. They played real hard against Oklahoma City, but ended up losing that game because of a barrage of Kevin Durant three-pointers, jawing at the bench, rubbing salt in the wounds. You did not draft me. You are not ahead of us in the standings. You will not be the best team in the West this year. Of course, that remains to be decided, but the Blazers kind of come home limping just a little bit off of a passable road trip. You know, it was great. 4 games, really tough ones. 2-2 is fine, but they'll be looking forward, I'm sure, to their home game against Denver on Thursday, which will be a day, I suppose. It will be yesterday as you see this, but hopefully they will have won that one, and hopefully they will be back on the right track.
My favorite part of what you just talked about, Dave, in consecutive videocasts, you have compared your Twitter account to Kim Kardashian's, and you have now officially compared your goatee to the Trailblazers. So it seems like maybe an ongoing theme. We're planning on implementing segments into this for our next videocast, so that's actually something that we should talk about because I really enjoyed that.
Dave's wacky comparison of the week.
Exactly. So wanted to talk a little bit, Dave. First off, before we get to the emails, want to remind you, again, these videocasts, along with Dave's writing every week, are 95% related to your emails. So send those in. blazersub@gmail.com is the place that you can send those for an opportunity for them to be answered either by Dave during the week on the off days or by us on the videocasts as well. So some emails that we got today, actually some really great emails that are kind of about a lot of the topics that they're both NBA related, and then a lot of topics that we haven't addressed really at all in the videocast, and excited to talk about some of them. Although the first one, Dave, is something that we've talked about at least briefly, but bringing it back to light, especially after the Trailblazers had this road trip where they did split the road trip. And this question is coming from Eric, and Eric asks, the Blazers are 15-7 on the road right now, which is good for second. Actually, I don't know officially if that's good for second, but it's certainly in the top 2 or 3 in the West. The question is, why is this team so good on the road? And he also talks about how the pattern with a lot of good teams is they are extremely good at home. You know, they hardly lose a home game. Yet when they go on the road, they kind of hover around that 500 mark. Yet right now the team is you know, almost 10 games above 500 on the road. So your thoughts, Dave, on why the Trailblazers away from home have had so much success?
There are a couple reasons, really. One is, this is your team. They don't necessarily play in a blue-collar style, but they're that blue-collar workman kind of team where you are going to get nearly 100% of what they're able to give on any given night. Some other teams relying on talent, I mean, you look at like the Nets, you look at the Knicks as 2 extreme examples, are either way up or way down depending on the night and depending on how well they take advantage of what they've got. The Blazers are not like that. You know the Blazers are going to give you a game every night. You know they're going to be playing as optimally as they can. Now, not every game is a work of art, but basically these guys, the throttle is near 100% every night, which means that they're going to have a lot more consistency. There's not going to be as big of a difference between home and road as you see as teams that rely more on emotion or talent. The other part of it is that obviously a lot of that impressive road record has come against the Eastern Conference. As the Blazers have moved into tougher Western Conference games the last couple of weeks, their record has drifted more toward 500 overall. I'm not sure, I didn't check the road numbers there. But for instance, you see on this 4-game road swing, even though it's a small sample, they're 2-2, 500. Okay, so they're probably not going to have that level of sustained road success all year as the schedule shifts back to the Western Conference. But they don't have to, as our writer points out. Great teams, the old saw goes, win all your games at home, win half of them on the road, you will be elite. The Blazers, as we talked about all season, have built a nice cushion in both cases. They have some room to play some 500 ball, and so they should remain in pretty good standing even if that record moderates.
Dave, I think that, and part of this too, Eric does point out that the team has 4 more road wins this year than they did all of last season, which is an incredible statistic. And I think that part of it, as you mentioned, this is a team that really does give maximum effort or awfully close to maximum effort on a game-to-game basis. But for whatever reason, Dave, and I might be crazy, well, I am, but that's beside the point. I think that one of the big things here, at least that I've seen, is the team is every game that they play at some point is fairly close. They've had a couple blowout wins, but it seems like they've become incredibly good at winning the close game. And when you have, and it doesn't, at that point, it doesn't so much matter whether you're at home or on the road. If you're entering the final 2 minutes and the game is tied, you have an opportunity to win those games. Whereas a lot of times, as we've seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years, the team would go on the road and they'd be down 15 points in the fourth quarter. And I really think that really has to do with they've played down to a lot of competition, but doing that has almost allowed them to have an opportunity to play in a lot of these close games, which on the road to be, to have a certain amount of comfort in that situation, I think is, done wonders for their record.
Yeah, it's a great observation. And it's interesting because this team also gets down 12 points, it seems, seemingly every game, but it's just not in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's usually in the second quarter, sometimes in the third, but then they're never down so far that they don't make a comeback. And usually they seem to close it and at some point, as you say, give themselves a chance, which is exactly what coaches preach on the road to teams that are trying to win games. Hey, we might not be elite, we might not be dominant, but if we give ourselves a chance right now to win on the road, maybe we can pull out our fair share of them. Now, the question you have to ask as a Blazer fan, and this is something I've been pondering for a while, it is great to be rooting for a team that's playing near optimal, that's giving near 100% every night. And again, I understand that some viewers are going to say, well, Damian Lillard doesn't have a great game every night. LaMarcus Aldridge is sometimes off. I'm not saying that everything goes perfectly every night. That will happen for exactly 0 teams in the NBA. But really, the Blazers don't take nights off. They are playing full throttle all the time. You're seeing near 100% of their capacity. The question for you as a Blazer fan is that good news? Because they are absolutely able. You're absolutely able to root for them with your full heart every night, knowing that they're putting the work in. Or is that bad news? Because you wonder if they have another level to go to, and you know that a lot of their opponents do. For instance, in the playoffs or whatever, you're not going to see the same Miami team. I mean, our lips to God's ears that we would see Miami in the playoffs. That would be great. But,
exactly.
Your Dallases, your Houstons, your whatever, you know that Houston in the playoffs is going to be a different team and probably more toward their maximum when the playoffs come around. Does Portland's maximum right now match up with Houston's? I'm not sure.
And to that point, though, Dave, I mean, this is a team that hasn't been in the playoffs. I don't know if we can necessarily say that they don't have that extra gear. I'm not saying one way or another, but I am saying that the odds of their extra gear being to the level or to the overall value of, say, a San Antonio or a Miami or even, as you mentioned, teams like Houston or maybe even like Golden State, teams that have had a little bit of playoff experience, but this team may have that extra gear. We've seen in the fourth quarter where they can turn on the defensive gear and actually play a little defense. They can have a couple possessions where they play some defense. So I wouldn't write it off yet, but the odds, as you mentioned, are probably not in their favor for a huge improvement.
I think that's the great hope, and defense is probably the one area where you do put a question mark on. I mean, which Trailblazer team is for real? Is it the one that locks down late, or is it the one that can't stop anybody in the paint early? But when I start looking for that extra gear, and believe me, I have, I start wondering where else it's going to come from. I mean, is it wings dribble driving? Do you trust Nicolas Batum and Wesley Matthews off the dribble? I don't. Does Robin Lopez have something extra on offense? He's been doing better the last couple games, fantastic, but I don't think that's a reliable source. How much more does LaMarcus Aldridge have? Damian Lillard, maybe. He might have some superlative games, and he might be another question mark. But can he sustain that over a course of, say, a 20 to 28 game playoff run? I don't know. And the bench, I don't think they've got anything more. So I think this is another argument for the Blazers getting some more help so that they can have that potential extra gear to go up against the best of the best on their best nights.
Well, you mentioned a couple names, Dave, and that moves us on to a couple questions about some individual players and some potential accolades for some players here as we move towards both the midpoint of the season and the All-Star break. So the first question is from Niz, and Niz asks, there's been a lot of talk about Nicolas Batum being an All-Star. So he's going to flat out ask, or she, I should say. I don't know. It's a he. I don't know. It is a he? Yeah, well.
I think so, but, forgive us.
And they're a Trailblazer fan, which is really the most important thing at this point. Do you think, Dave, that Nick Batum should be an All-Star this season?
Yeah, no, I don't. And it's not that I don't value his contribution. The All-Star game has never been about those subtle glue guys. And for a reason. It's an exhibition, okay? It doesn't matter who wins the game. You want to see the flashy dunks, the flashy plays. Glue guys, for basketball purists, they make us go crazy. We love them. But for the casual fan, for that glitzy spotlight weekend, who cares? And the other part of it is, if you take a guy like Batum and say, well, he's so important to his team winning, then you have to start comparing him to all the other players who also qualify for that designation on their teams. And why would you take Batum over, Tayshaun Prince of a couple years ago or whatever? And if you start getting a pool of 6 to 8 guys who really do that for their teams, who are they pushing out? So you're going to take those guys and push out LeBron or whatever. What you're going to end up with this year, frankly, if you take Batum, then you have to ask, well, who else is coming out of the game? And if it weren't for injuries to all point guards, you know who that would be? That would be, you would be taking Batum over Damian Lillard, because he's the guy on the bubble when it comes to guards if they're injury-free. You could also be taking him instead of LaMarcus Aldridge, because there are a lot of power forwards. And there's just no comparison there. Aldridge is definitely an all-star. Lillard should be definitely right now, probably should be anyway. Batum is just not at that same level.
And just to throw a couple names, you mentioned the guys that are kind of the fringe guys that are probably having, better seasons anyways, or at least comparable seasons. Mm-hmm. They played him against this road trip. 2 big names stand out. Chandler Parsons is one. Kawhi Leonard is another one. Mm-hmm. Glue guys, as you mentioned, but there are just so many good bigs in the West. I mean, it's not that Batum isn't having a good season. As you mentioned, he's not a flashy player at all. Sometimes you're like, he had that many rebounds or he had that many assists, and it doesn't necessarily pass the eye test. But when you're talking about Tim Duncan, Anthony Davis, Andre Iguodala, who's having a great year, Dirk, DeMarcus Cousins, the couple guys I mentioned, it's not that Batum isn't having a good season. He's not he's not having, I believe, an all-star caliber season, and B, even if he were in that conversation, there are so many guys in the West that are in that conversation right now that it would make it quite tough.
Yeah. How would you feel if Chandler Parsons made it over Lillard or Aldridge? You'd be furious. Well, that's exactly how Sacramento would feel about Batum making it over DeMarcus Cousins. Cousins is having a great year, and he has changed his game. He is really affecting every contest he plays well in anyway, and he is playing a lot smarter game this year than usual. He deserves consideration for the All-Star team, and he shouldn't be bumped out by a guy like Batum, who, by the way, if he gets there, the reason he's successful in part is because Stotts runs a lot of the offense through him. It's not through Damian Lillard. It's in Batum's hand. The All-Star team is not going to do that. They're not going to look at Nicolas Batum and say, we're gonna give you the ball enough to where you accumulate 9 assists. He's going to go out there and probably wilt. So why would you not want a Cousins in an exhibition environment like that?
Yeah, and let's be honest, who's more entertaining, Boogie or Nick Batum? I mean, it's really no comparison. Next question. Thanks, Niz, for that question. Next question comes from Daniel. We've addressed this question, Dave, a couple of times. We talked before the video cast, before we started going live on this thing, but and it's a question that we've addressed a couple of times, but as I said, it seemingly comes up over and over and over again, especially with the kind of road trip he had and the kind of impact that he's having on the season, and that's LaMarcus Aldridge. And Daniel asks, is there any shot that LaMarcus Aldridge wins the MVP this season? And I'm going to add another question to that, kind of rephrase it. A, Daniel asks, is there any shot? And, I guess the other question here, Dave, is B, what type of consideration should he be getting? Because I think that those are, two pretty different questions.
Yeah, no, there's no shot as long as Kevin Durant and LeBron James exist. So practically speaking, no. End of story. However, he's the Blazers' most valuable player by far. The Blazers are a very good winning team in this league. So he should be mentioned in the paragraph where you talk about MVPs, even if he's not mentioned in the first sentence, because that ends with 2 players. And as I've said before, whatever you give to Paul George, basically, give to LaMarcus Aldridge. If you give George that kind of respect for what he's doing in Indiana, also give Aldridge the respect for what he's doing in Portland, and let him be a really nice part of that conversation. At the same time, you end that conversation the same way you started it. Okay, it's either LeBron James or Kevin Durant, and appropriately so, because those guys are just on another level from anyone else in this league.
Well, and we saw it when the team was playing against Oklahoma City. LaMarcus had it going in that game, especially in the third quarter. And then you saw the difference between an elite player and an MVP player. Right. What Kevin Durant did to the Trailblazers at the end of that game. There are 2 players exactly in the league that can do that, and it's Kevin Durant and LeBron James. Another thing that the way I've kind of come to think of it is LaMarcus Aldridge would be invited to the Heisman ceremony. He is on the invitation list of the 4 or 5 guys that are going to that ceremony, but he's not beating Johnny Manziel. He's not gonna be beat the Jameis Winstons of the world. He's the guy that plays for kind of an underrepresented team, especially in the media, that's having an outstanding year. I mean, the guy has been really one of the best 3, 4, 5 best players in the league, and arguably the most consistent player in the NBA this year. But he's on that list, but is he going to compete? I 100% agree that for better or for worse, there's just a couple guys out there that are better than he is.
And 2 things about what you said. One is, I believe that guys like Damian Lillard can do to other teams what Durant did to the Blazers last night or this week from our perspective. But he doesn't do it every night. Durant and LeBron James are just that kind of player every single night, and that's what raises them to another level. And, they're absolutely incredible. And, Aldridge is the best power forward in the league by far now, and I don't think that's even a debate. I know people always pipe up about Kevin Love, especially Minnesota fans. I understand your guy has slightly better stats and excels in some areas. But when you look around and you look at all-around play and the effect on his team, and you watch what he's done for the Blazers night in and night out, LaMarcus Aldridge is now at the top of that pinnacle, and that's really an honor in a league where there are quite a few power forwards who are elite, who are excellent. So the Blazer fans will have to content themselves with that, and with Dave pronouncing that battle is over, at least for this year, that there's no question that Aldridge is the power forward you would want. But MVP is reaching a little too high.
Yeah, you mentioned the Lillard-Durant comparison. By the way, Kevin Durant also scored 50 points this week in a game, and it wasn't against the Trailblazers. So, right. I mean, it's unbelievable. And he's also doing this without who some would argue, their closer. And he's kind of had to take on a different role on that team. And, does he do it on the defensive end? That's up for debate. But on the offensive end, there's maybe not even a better weapon in the last 15 years on the offensive end than Kevin Durant.
He is just stupid good. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He is on. All the rest of us are looking up the mountain at him going, how did he get up there? And there's no way, there's not a path you can follow to do what he does. He landed there, and he's just on another level.
And by the way, Dave, when he was raining threes at the end of that game, you knew every single one was going to go in. I mean, there was no doubt that he was going to make every single one of those shots.
Although, keep in mind, Blazer fans, there have been games over the last few years where Durant has relied too heavily on the three, and it has cost his team. The Blazers have beaten the Thunder because Kevin Durant was out beyond the arc. So this game was kind of payback for that. This game was Durant's catharsis, where he got to say, this is what I do, and put the Blazers away. It was an interesting game. It was a statement game for Oklahoma City, but Blazer fans should be happy, I think, that Oklahoma City made a statement game against Portland as opposed to just summarily disposing of Portland in their own building.
So great question there from Daniel, and I think that, as we move throughout the season, Dave, LaMarcus Aldridge's consistency, it becomes more and more impressive. I mean, you can book him for 24 and 12 every night. I mean, literally every night.
Yeah, rebounding has been incredible. And if you've watched, again, people about the eye test, but sometimes the eye test is pretty good if you know what to look for. He is getting contested rebounds. He is getting rebounds that the Blazers would not have gotten without him. And he is just manning up on the glass, which is another level for him. Remember, he used to be only good for like 8 rebounds a night, and he's really put the effort in and filled that space that Robin Lopez is clearing, and it's been wonderful to watch.
Dave, we're on the topic of LaMarcus Aldridge, and I know it isn't necessarily on this list, and we hadn't exactly planned on it, but I did have another question. It was something that I was watching the I think it was the Oklahoma City game, but over that road trip, really, Aldridge became such an elite rebounder. He really kind of asserted himself as one of the best rebounding power forwards in the league. He wasn't just a scorer. He's a guy that's willing to go inside and do the dirty work, and that's on the defensive end as well. Mm-hmm. So, big question for you, Dave, and this is something that it's coming right off the cuff here. But when Aldridge, what was it, maybe 2 or 3 years ago? This is when Brandon Roy was still on the team, and he had that stretch between, it was like December and February, where he had that home game in his hometown in Dallas, and all of a sudden became this dominant guy where he would attack the basket every single time he got the basketball. And he was either going to make a basket from point-blank range or he was going to get fouled. And there was really no other alternative to those two things. And then over the course of the next couple of years, we kind of saw him go back into that mid-range game, hit the elbow jumper. He started to develop, over the right shoulder, over the left shoulder. He sort of was improving that outside game, and everyone kept saying, you have to go inside, you have to go inside. Now it seems like him spending that, those 150 games of going, recreating his game on the outside in addition to that post game, and kind of having a chip on his shoulder like, I want to be an MVP. I want to get this team to the playoffs. I am the leader of this team. I think it's quite a transformation this year to see him match this outside game with the inside game. This is the first 30, 40 games that we've ever seen him utilize both simultaneously. And he's, if his outside shot is going down, he basically becomes an impossible player to guard.
Right. And part of it is he's not comfortable naturally in traditional low post spots because he doesn't get to use his quickness as much. I mean, there are players as big as he is, and they can shove him around, disrupt his catch, certainly disrupt his dribble, which is not real strong. And when he doesn't have a lot of space to escape, he's not the same player because he can't take or make use of his size and quickness together. Now, put him out on the court between 12 and 15 feet, and he can use the combination of both. He has 2 or 3 options as far as which way he wants to go. If you are not as big as he is, he will simply shoot it over you. If you're not as quick as he is, he can drive around you. So he's kind of like the traditional shooting guard offense, except that he's doing it with his back to the basket and he's power forward. So the transformation took a while. And it certainly took a while for him to perfect his craft, but now that it is perfected, you see how this really naturally takes advantage of his physical ability and his mental comfort zone. Simply put, inside the lane, he only has about 1 option, maybe 2, and the defense can take away 1 or both of those pretty easily. So this is a better situation for him. That said, we didn't know this until now, and really the team wasn't set up for this until now. There's a synergy with the outside shooting. You'll remember when Raymond Felton was his point guard, there's plenty of times that the opponent double-teamed him. He threw the ball out to Felton at the three-point line, and Felton bricked the shot, so there was no penalty for sending an extra man against LaMarcus. This is the first year where the team has been set up around him to where he could succeed like this.
I saw Gerald Wallace miss a couple of those threes too, Dave.
Yeah. Well, Gerald Wallace is well remembered in Portland. You get extra brownie points and Rex for mentioning Raymond Felton negatively. So I'm just trying to grease the wheels here to make our videocast more popular.
I think, and let's be honest, Dave, you 100% just nailed it by saying you got brownie points by mentioning Raymond Felton on the program. Next question. Great question from Daniel. Appreciate that. Next question, also from Daniel. I don't know if it's the same one, if it's a different one.
Same Daniel.
Same Daniel. He's killing it with the questions this week.
That's right.
This one is actually completely off topic, Dave. But we both thought it was a fairly interesting topic. And Daniel read an article recently that stated many reasons why the NBA would have difficulty implementing a division in Europe. I don't think that we have to go over all of the different ways that would be difficult. The question here is, and I think that it's something that the league talks about so much in trying to build the brand internationally. The NBA really became the first league to be able to do that extremely effectively. And I think that there's always kind of been this question of would the NBA ever move to Europe? Do you think, A, that would happen, and B, logistically, if that would even be possible?
I think it could happen. You could see an NBA Europe, especially if the NBA were in the business of kind of taking over another league over there, or another league wanted to brand themselves as NBA Europe. I see a lot of problems making it unified for obvious reasons. So I think the first few years it probably would not be. You'd almost have to have no contact between the two leagues except perhaps an exhibition game or something. Because obviously the travel and the idea of sending half of your NBA players into another league just doesn't make sense in a league where the talent by many is already viewed as diluted. How are you going to absorb let's say, 10 or 12 more teams into another conference that's in Europe when you're already scraping by to get real NBA players as your 12th man. So I think what might happen over there is they form a self-sufficient league. They play amongst themselves. They get that rolling, and maybe you get the same thing where guys who don't quite make it in the U.S. go over there and play to rehabilitate their careers with maybe some dignity and some good competition. And then eventually, if that rolls far enough, you might end up with the NBA U.S. champion playing the NBA Europe champion in a great World Championship final. Maybe you have the All-Star game matched up as NBA US versus NBA Europe or something. But I don't see that happening for any number of years.
Two quick questions. One serious and one not as serious. The not as serious one is, would you have to rename the NBA to the International Basketball Association? And then the next question is, you talk about, do they create a new league in Europe? Is this a candidate for what the D League becomes? I know that right now, I actually, living in northern Indiana, we have a D League team in Fort Wayne, the Mad Ants, which is one of the best mascots team names I've ever heard. But it is an opportunity for, I think we've seen, guys like CJ McCollum, if they're recovering from an injury, potentially guys like Anthony Bennett or Shabazz Muhammad who struggling to make the NBA roster, put them somewhere where they can at least get some time and improve their game. But if they're, should the NBA try to kill two birds with one stone and try to move that league to a different place where probably the quality of the D League is as good as some of these other international leagues. So you're not going to get a huge step down in quality, but you're also able to improve player performance in your league on the home front.
I would say not, because I don't think Europe would accept that. I mean, we think of it as kind of, well, it's this other place basketball-wise, and they should be happy to get whatever teams they have. But, I mean, come on, we're talking London, one of the major cities in the world, Paris. The French won't let you speak their language. You think they're going to take your second-rate basketball team? No way. So the NBA, if they're going to make it work financially and generate momentum, will have to give the image that this is among the premier basketball played in the world. And frankly, current European teams probably could kick butt over most D-League teams, I would think. So, that wouldn't be acceptable to the viewers over there. I don't think the league would really take off unless it was seen as more or less co-equal to the American NBA. Now, would that be fact in the first few years? Probably not, but you have to be building toward a time where that league gets the same amount of respect as their U.S. counterparts. Otherwise, there's major metropolises, those major fan bases are just going to watch their football and the World Cup and say, forget this minor league stuff.
One last question, Dave. You got time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, our last question comes from Ken. And Ken asks, seeing how the Blazer point guards are clearly the weak links on the defense, why aren't the Trailblazers bringing in a guy like Gary Payton as an assistant coach? Lillard even wanted to learn from the glove, so what's the holdup? Dave, what is the holdup here, Dave, on this idea from Ken?
Well, the obvious practical one is you're going to pay Gary Payton enough salary to bring him along on road trips when he's just an assistant coach. That's going to cost a lot of money, probably for not a ton of return. Second thing is you have to ask, do ex-star players really make that much of a difference and that much of a consistent difference that you'd want to have them as an actual assistant coach? I can see Lillard going to Payton for pointers over the summer, sure, but that's Lillard's responsibility and that's their relationship. I don't think necessarily bringing in a star guy as an assistant coach means that A, he's a good coach, or B, the players are going to be able to learn from him. I mean, I've, frankly, for our network, I have, I don't want to say tutored, but guided quite a few blogs and websites trying to make them better because we have that amount of respect around our network. And the quality of result that I get working with people is pretty much directly related to their ability and their willingness to work on it. My talent doesn't make as much difference as theirs. And if they have the talent, sure, and the inclination, I can give them a push in the right direction, but that's usually a pretty brief thing, set them on the right course, and then they take it from there. It's not like I'm looking over their shoulder and driving their site every single day. It's the same way with the NBA. If Lillard and Mo Williams don't have the inclination or ability to defend, you can bring anyone in that you want. It doesn't mean that they're going to be able to make them better.
Dave, I'm going to be 100% honest here. You started saying, I've been with the network and I've done all this. I seriously thought you were about to say, I've gotten invitations to be an assistant coach with Team XYZ.
No.
That is amazing.
No, I guarantee you that I don't know nearly enough about X's and O's. I mean, what I know is a thimbleful compared to actual coaches and scouts, and I've talked to these people. I've sat with them. I've had scouts watch games with me and just talk and explain what they see. And, you know, I've seen some of it, and we've talked back and forth. I'm not completely impotent in that situation, but I am nowhere near a professional and have always realized that. What I do is I write and I watch and I communicate. And by the way, it works both ways. Let's stick up for writers and stuff like that. You know, it's funny because people think that anybody can write for a website and bloggers sit around in their underwear. There are skills and abilities to this that, say, an assistant coach couldn't just pick up a keyboard and do what we do. It works both ways. But you got to realize the division between the two. And I have never fancied myself a scout, a GM, or whatever. Those guys I have ultimate respect for. They have dedicated their lives to this, and we should all honor them as we're playing armchair GM on our sites and in our comments. We should honor the people who really have put in the work to do this professionally, because they are very, very good. And I wouldn't expect them, if the idea, let's invite Dave as an assistant coach, I would expect that they would laugh at that, and appropriately so. I laugh at it as well.
Well, I was kind of giggling in the background as well as you were saying all of this. I was like, what is he building to right now?
No.
To briefly go back to that point, though, Dave, I don't think there's any question that Damian Lillard has a relationship with Gary Payton. I'm not sure to what extent that relationship is, but you know, Lillard carries that Oakland, that Oakland pride, I think, as much as anyone does. I mean, he wears the number 0. You know, they call it the letter O. Yeah. That big tattoo he has is for his hometown. So I think that there's no question that, is he, you know, can Gary Payton become the Akeem Olajuwon type mentor for Damian Lillard? You know, that's one thing, but for him to turn into, you know, a Patrick Ewing where he actually is becoming an assistant coach, or he's actually coming up to be, you know, a head coach. Another guy that would be an example of this, Dave, is Damon Stoudemire. You know, a guy that was a solid NBA player, but now has reinvented himself in the coaching ranks. So I do think that there are ways that Lillard can improve his game without that assistant coach. And I think that Oakland connection is one that it's, you know, I'm not going to say it's like the Portland connection, but I do think there is a thing where you can say I'm from Portland, and that means something to someone. I think that that's the same thing, the same type of relationship I'm sure that Lillard has with GP.
Yeah, Oakland point guards, that's a strong fraternity. But, you know, if Lillard wants to get better at defense, he will. And it's really up to him. The biggest part of this question is the misperception, I think, of what coaches do. Or I shouldn't say misperception. Let's give some credit to our reader. Rather, the expansion. If something's not happening, it must be coaching, I think, is a way to work your way around a player's natural weaknesses or inclinations. Damian Lillard may not be a defender, may not ever be a good defender. That just may not be in his package. That's not coaching. That's Lillard, okay? If he becomes a better defender, it will be in part because of coaching, but most of it will be because of him. It's the same way in the the Oklahoma City game, I think. It was a loss, and then people criticized the quote-unquote play calling in the last, 5 minutes of of the contest. Terry Stotts does not call a lot of plays for this team. He is not Nate McMillan or Byron Scott or a coach that controls the offense a lot. These guys have the job of reading and reacting to the defense and finding the open spot and playing together and moving the ball. The players do most of that. But all of a sudden, when something goes wrong, it's not the players anymore, it's the coaches. The coaches don't determine the game that closely. They set the framework, and it's up to the players to work within that framework, and it's their responsibility and their talent in question. They get credit for the wins, but also they get credit for when things go wrong. It's not automatically the coaches who determine everything when things go bad.
And let's make the greater point here too, Dave. Damian Lillard has played 1.5 seasons in the NBA. Mm-hmm. He isn't entering his prime. He's not, the LaMarcus Aldridge type where he's now pieced together. Like, LaMarcus Aldridge was not, well, he isn't really an elite defender, but we just talked about for 10 minutes how great a rebounder he has become. When he came into the league, that was not in the conversation at all. And now he's become a guy that gets after it, rebounding the basketball, and really does get after it on the defensive end as well. Mm-hmm. So, defense, he has the athletic skills, Lillard does, and the athleticism in order to be a good defender. But you don't just walk into the NBA and in 100 games you're immediately shutting down, Kevin Durant. I mean, that just doesn't happen. There are 2 or 3 guys maybe in history that have ever done something like that. So I think that's a greater point here is this is a team, they're in the top 10 youngest teams in the NBA, and I think they might even be in the top 5. Mm-hmm. So this is a team that has plenty of room to grow, mainly on the defensive end. So I don't think that we need to get too worried on the defensive side. Obviously, it's concerning because the team is 3rd in the West, but I do think that we can probably slow our roll just a little bit on that thing, just because he is early 20s player that has played in a handful of NBA games.
Right, and really, Robin Lopez has a much bigger effect on Portland's defense than anything Damian Lillard does. And Lopez is a much better defender. Lillard is not. So obviously, you want to, if there's weakness, you kind of want to pin it on Lillard, and appropriately so. But really, if you had a more mobile center, then he could erase some of those Lillard mistakes, like most teams do. So it's not necessarily all on Lillard. It's not saying that Lopez is a bad defender either. It's just his limitations, and then the limitations of a point guard not being able to stop penetration don't fit very well together, even though both are really good at what they do. And so, you can't just point at Lillard and say, "You suck. You're destroying everything." He kind of sucks on defense, and so does Mo Williams. But the Blazers need to be able, over the years, to compensate for that more, to cover a player who's not a great defender, because very few teams have 5 really great defenders on the offensive or on the starting lineup who are also good at offense, good enough to make you an elite team. You have to give and take with all of that, and that's part of the process that the Blazers will go through over the next few years.
Once again, thanks to Ken for that last question. Thanks to everyone for sending in their emails this week. If you have an email to send in, blazersub@gmail.com, the place to do it. That, once again, blazersub@gmail.com. Dave, the team split the road trip in both Texas and in Oklahoma City. Your thoughts? We got a couple of weeks off, so any final thoughts for us as we move through the next couple of weeks?
Well, you just try to get back on the winning track. Again, try to rebuild your cushion as much as possible against those tough scheduling stints, which are coming up in the spring. Now, the rubber's going to meet the road here, and we will see. But again, as we talked about earlier, the Blazers have built enough of a lead to where, worst case scenario, they make the playoffs. I mean, it's hard to imagine them drifting down to that 9th spot at this point. So you check off one of the marks on your season goals, and now you just ask, how high? And you work every game to make sure that seed is as high as possible. Give yourself a chance in the postseason to win a series or 2.
Again, thanks to all the emails for their questions. Thanks to you, Dave, for your time Today, for Dave Deckard, I am Sam Tung. Thank you all so much for joining us here on the Blazers Edge Videocast this week. A reminder, we will be back in 2 weeks. You can also catch Chris Lucia's podcast that's coming out next week as well. So keep an eye out for that, and we're going to be alternating those week to week. So again, for Dave, I am Sam Tung, and we will talk to you all in a couple of weeks.